All right, it's Thursday here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, here to talk a little Pitt sports with you, as we do every morning, Monday through Friday in the Morning Pitt right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know the drill. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Appreciate everybody who subscribed yesterday. Got us over that 3,000 subscriber mark. That was awesome. Let's keep that going. Still got about 40% of the people who watch these videos who are not subscribed to our YouTube channel. So you should rectify that right now by clicking that little subscribe button that's right down there. It's a little blue rectangle. YouTube has a much bigger button that you can push, but I put a button right there on the video, right on the right-hand side of your screen. You can click that subscribe button and stay tuned to everything we do here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you do it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, check out the website Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. It's all at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Still kind of recapping and thinking and reviewing about Pitt's win on Tuesday night against Georgia Tech. And it's funny how there's been an ongoing discussion on the message boards about perception and the perception of that win and how it's going to affect Pitt's perception nationally and whether their ranking's going to go up or go down. And look, I'll say again, I kind of just don't care about the rankings at this point. Look, we've made a big deal about a lot of the benchmarks and notables and the last time check marks that they've passed so far this season, the mileposts being ranked. I mean, we'll certainly talk about that when it happens, and I think it eventually will. If it's not next week, it'll be the week after that or at some point. I mean, we'll talk. I think it will happen, and I think we'll talk about it. But to me, that doesn't mean nearly as much as 20 wins or a winning record or a new record for wins in, ACC wins in a season, or getting back to the NCAA tournament, or getting a program high seed in the ACC. I mean, there are a lot of other things that to me are a lot more tangible and notable as markers of success than getting into the polls. I think it'll happen when it happens, and that's neither here nor there. But it's interesting to see the conversation about the perception of Pitt's win, a 76-68 win, an 8-point win over Georgia Tech at home. Pitt was favored by 10.5, and there's a discussion on the message boards, and a good discussion, largely civil, about whether if the fact that Pitt only won by 8 is going to be held against them. And I think someone pointed out, or someone said this, and I tend to agree that, an 8-point win doesn't look all that bad. That looks like a solid win. And I think most voters probably did not spend all of their Tuesday night watching Pitt Georgia Tech to see that Pitt was actually down with 12 minutes to go in the game. And Pitt really was only up by 1 at halftime. And Pitt never really pulled away until the final few minutes when they made a bunch of free throws to extend the lead. And how they clamped down on defense and played a full court press and all these different things. In the end, it's just going to get looked at as a box score with an 8-point win that seems like a home team more or less taking care of business against an inferior conference opponent. Maybe getting a little bit more of a challenge than they expected, but not anything that I think is going to resonate beyond just going as a win. And Pitt's now at 20 wins. And so, if they do, when it comes time to vote again, if they're able to beat Syracuse and get to 21-8 overall and 14-4 in the ACC, I mean, that should be enough to bump them into the national polls, I would think. But I've thought that on a few different occasions this season and been wrong every time. So I'm going to stop guessing on when they'll break into the rankings and just keep watching for the games and the results to see how far this team can go. And as we think about this team, and as I've been thinking about this team a lot, as I'm sure you have as well, I started thinking about, and it's one of the sort of cliches of sports coverage and sports media talking heads, but sort of stock up, stock down. And when you look at Pitt's players, how the stock report looks for the Panthers right now, heading into final 3 games of the regular season and then postseason beyond. And our guy Steven Gertz does power rankings every week, kind of ranking the top 5 players on the team based on the last week or so of games. I'm kind of looking a little bit more the last 8 games, and I picked that not because it's an arbitrary number, it's not random. It's 8 games since they lost to Florida State at home. Obviously, they've been 7-1 in that stretch, but I'm curious how the main players for this team, the top 6 guys, have responded and performed in the wake of those, in the wake of that Florida State loss, and in the 8 games since then. How have they played, and who's really been the top guys, and who's been the guys who have struggled? And I have to start with Nelly Cummings. I did a Morning Pitt video maybe last week or the week before, I forget, talking about Nelly Cummings being underrated and questioning why he was underrated by Pitt fans. Why Pitt fans don't seem to want to give Nelly Cummings more credit than he's getting, or the credit that I think he deserves. In the 8 games since the Florida State game, since they lost to Florida State, Pitt 7-1 over that stretch, Nelly Cummings is averaging 12.8 points per game, 5.4 assists, 2.9 rebounds. So you're looking at about 13 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds per game. He's shooting 48% from the field, 47% from 3, 48.7% from 2. He's playing almost 32 minutes per game, and he's averaging less than 2 fouls per game. He's keeping himself on the court. He's playing well. He's distributing. He's making baskets at a high rate. That 47% from 3 number is remarkable to me over the last 8 games. I know Cummings can shoot the 3. I know he's pretty good at shooting the 3. I think he gets overshadowed by Blake Henson and Greg Elliott, and understandably so, but I think he's right behind those 2 guys and is a viable 3-point weapon. But the fact that over the last 8 games, he's shot 47% from beyond the arc is really remarkable to me. And obviously Tuesday night he had a big game, scored 22 points, had 7 assists. I've talked about that stat before about how Pitt is now, 13-3 this season when he has at least 5 assists in a game. Over these last 8 games, he's averaging better than 5 assists per game. The exception would be let me just check his stats from the Virginia Tech game, but I think that was obviously that was the loss they had in that stretch. I just want to double check how many assists he had that day. Oh, he had 8. Okay, so that was one of the losses. Like I said, Pitt is 13-3 when Nelly Cummings has at least 5 assists. I forgot that he went 11-8 back to back. Boston College and Virginia Tech, he had 11 points and 8 assists in both games. I think in 5 rebounds as well. It's a weird statistical thing. But that's one of the few times that Pitt has lost when Nelly Cummings has had more than 5 assists, or 5 or more assists, I should say. He had 7 on Tuesday night against Georgia Tech, in addition to his 22 points. And they got back in the win column. And I don't think you can overstate how good he has been for this team, how important he has been for this team, and particularly over the last 4 weeks of basketball, 5 weeks of basketball, how good he's been at getting this team on track and keeping them on track. And that's not to diminish the performance of Jamarius Burton or Blake Henson or anybody else. But I think Nelly Cummings continues to be underrated and shouldn't be, particularly in light of a 22-point game where I think he had something to do with, I think it ended up being 13 of Pitt's 24 baskets he either scored or assisted on. I mean, he's the one that makes it go. He might not be a glue guy, but he's the one who makes it go. And I'll tell you who else has a stock up right now and has been, the stock arrow has been pointing up for a while now. It's Federico. And when I ranked the newcomers, I did that last week, I think, on the Morning Pitt, and then on the 3-2-1 column on Panther-Lair.com. I put Blake Henson number 1 among the newcomers. I think I put Federico behind Nelly Cummings and Greg Elliott too. And you'll get a debate from me about Federico or Elliott. I still think this team lives and dies by the 3. Most of its success is going to come from the 3-point shooting, and Greg Elliott is the best 3-point shooter on this team. And so I'm still going to lean toward him over Federico, but Federico has been outstanding. Again, this 8-game sample size since the Florida State loss, 8.5 points per game, 6.5 rebounds. He's shooting 63% from the field, 76% from the free throw line. He's averaging 28.5 minutes per game and 3.4 fouls per game, which I don't think is an unimportant number. I think when you're talking about a big guy like Federico and someone who's going to get bullied around and might resort to making unnecessary contact and getting called for fouls a lot, The fact that he's only averaging 3.4 fouls per game over the last 8, I think is a huge number. But really, we can extend the Federico sample size out beyond the last 8 games, because I think it's pretty damn remarkable to look at what he's done since he moved into the starting lineup full time. I think it was December 10th when they played Sacred Heart. He has started the last 18 games. He started a couple before that, but when he made his full time move into the starting lineup, it was that game against Sacred Heart. So 18 games from Sacred Heart through Georgia Tech on Tuesday night. Federico's averaging 8.4 points per game, 6.8 rebounds, 2.2 blocks. He's shooting 62.4% from the field. He's shooting 73.5% from the free throw line. He's playing 28.5 minutes, and he's averaging 3.1 fouls per game. I mean, what a stat line. On a team that's guard dominated and a team that's going to shoot a lot of threes and is going to generate most of his offense from that area, Federico going for more than 8 points per game as a starter in the last 18 games and almost 7 rebounds along with his 2.2 blocks per game. I made my bold prediction last year was that Mo Gee would average 2 blocks per game. Federico in 18 games as a starter, 18 consecutive games as a starter, is averaging better than 2 blocks per game. And shooting a ridiculously high percentage from the field, which he should as a guy his size who plays near the basket so much. But then that 73.5% free throw mark, I mean, he's becoming a really dangerous player. And a lot of his offense still feels like it happens by accident. There are things that happen in transition, occasionally put back baskets. He gets lost behind the defense, or the defense loses him, I should say. And, Nelly Cummings or Jamarius Burton is able to get him the ball and he's able to finish that way. It's still not a regular function of this offense to work the ball inside and try and score that way. We'll see if they attempt to do a little bit more of that against the Syracuse zone on Saturday. But, I mean, he has been outstanding. Outstanding to put up that stat line, 8 and 7 and 2. Because of the blocks, which I think is also a not unimportant stat. To put up that stat line on this team with this roster, with the way they play, like I said, if you want to make an argument for flipping Federico and Greg Elliott in the ranking of the newcomers, I can't entirely disagree. I'm still leaning toward Elliott, but I can't disagree. Now, speaking of Elliott, when we talk about stock up, stock down, my initial thought was, stock down. He's not playing well. He was 1 of 4 from 3 against Georgia Tech. He was 1 of 3 from 3 against Virginia Tech. He's just not. He's not cooking. He's not doing what they need him to do. He's not providing the presence and the threat that they need him to provide. But I looked over the last 8 games. Since the Florida State game, 11.6 points per game. 3.4 rebounds. Greg Elliott's sort of a sneaky, a low-key, like, oh, look, he got another rebound type of guy. You never expect him to put up big rebound numbers, but he typically finds himself near the basket on defensive possessions and grabbing a few rebounds. He's shooting 49% from the field, and this is in the last 8 games, 48.9% from 3. He's almost a 50% three-point shooter over the last 8 games since that Florida State loss. What a remarkable total. You've got a guy, like I said, he's the best 3-point shooter on the team, and he's shooting 49% from outside the arc over the last 8 games. So why do I feel like the arrow is pointing down? Why do I feel like he's a stock down guy right now? And you probably watched the Morning Pitt yesterday. You heard me talk about Elliott and sort of my concerns about him and how he's been playing. But I do think there is something to be said for volume. I think, over these last 8 games, he's averaging, almost 6 3-point attempts per game. But in the last 2 games, he's only attempted 7 total. Like I said, 1 of 4 at Virginia Tech, 1 of 3 at Virginia Tech, 1 of 4 against Georgia Tech. And that's a problem. I mean, you need volume shooting out of Greg Elliott, particularly if he's going to shoot 49%. You need that quick trigger. And I talked a lot about this on the Morning Pit yesterday, and somebody commented that, sometimes the passes are off the mark and it slows down his release because he has to gather the ball and collect the ball before he fires. And there's probably some truth to that. But my sense of it, my perception of it watching him is that he's catching passes, the same kind of passes that he was catching earlier in the season when he was firing threes up a lot quicker. And when I say earlier in the season, I don't mean December. I mean January. I mean the first couple of weeks of February. He seemed to be far more trigger happy and have a much quicker trigger when it comes to shooting threes than he has in the last couple of games. And maybe he's hurt a little bit. Maybe his legs are tired. Maybe they're defending him differently. I don't know what the issue is or what the change is, but it does feel like there's been a change. Now, even with all that, he's still shooting almost 50% from outside the arc. He's going to continue to be a big weapon for this team and an important weapon for this team as he goes forward. He's just got to, and he's doing an okay job scoring inside, but his job is to be outside. His job is to stand outside the arc and knock down the threes. And that's where they need him to get back to. And that's what's going to help them win the maximum number of games going forward. Blake Henson is a guy who probably headed into Tuesday night. We started to feel like the stock was down a little bit. I think he had, 4 points or something at Virginia Tech. It was not good. And it sort of felt like that had been building for a little while. But he certainly redeemed himself a fair amount on Tuesday night against Georgia Tech with 19 points, 5 of 9 from 3. And the reality is he's actually, even if some of the stats are, heavily loaded into a few games here or there, the reality is over the last 8 games since the Florida State loss, he's averaging 15 points, 5 rebounds per game. He's shooting almost 43% from the floor. He's shooting 44% from 3, and he's playing better than 30 minutes per game. And he's a big guy. 30 minutes is a lot of minutes. But even when he's had his off nights, he's still, taking it all together over the last 8 games. He's still shooting 44% from 3. I mean, he really is. I'm not gonna go down the path again. I've talked about it a number of times about Blake Henson's impact on this team. They are now 14-2 when he scores at least 16 points. The most recent win in that column coming from Tuesday night's game when he had 19. I mean, he really is the wild card. And I think wild card might be a better term than X factor just because of the unpredictability. And there is unpredictability in Blake Henson's game. When he's on, I mean, you feel like every shot is going to go in. I know he feels like every shot is going to go in, but you watching the game, when he's having one of his good nights like he had on Tuesday night, you feel like every shot's a good shot. I don't, maybe one of the 9 from 3 that he took on Tuesday night, when the ball came out of his hands, you said, oh no, that's a problem. Or that's not a good one. And that was more because you can almost tell with the way, I still see it. It was when they were shooting on the home, it was the second half, they were shooting on the home end of the court, and he put up a 3, and you can almost tell as soon as it came out of his hands, he just shot it awkwardly, and he was gonna leave it short, and it did. It bounced off the front end of the rim. But for the most part, I mean, when he pulls up, and you have a little bit of this sense with Elliott too, but when Henson pulls up for a 3, I think we're all conditioned at this point to believe it's probably going to be, it's got a good chance of going in. And certainly in the last 8 games, they've had 44% chance of going in. I think Tuesday night can be a springboard for Blake Henson and really push him forward into this stretch run of the regular season and into the postseason. I could see him going on a little bit of a tear here. He's done it a couple times this season, and I could see him going on a tear here to close out the regular season. Jamarius Burton is a guy that I talked about it yesterday, I guess on the Morning Pitt. I talked about feeling concerned about Burton, and so I was a little surprised when I looked at the stats from the 8 games since the Florida State game. The Florida State loss, I should say. 13.5 points per game. 5 rebounds and 4 assists. I mean, that's a great stat line. 13, 5, and 4. I mean, that is a great stat line from Jamarius Burton. He's shooting 40% from the field, 45% inside the 3-point line. He doesn't shoot a lot of threes, but the attempts that he's had have brought it down. If you've watched Pitt games on TV, you know from Dan Bonner that that's not really Jamarius Burton's game. Hear that every single time Burton even touches the ball standing outside the three-point line, let alone shooting it, which he doesn't do very often. I think he had one attempt from 3 in the Georgia Tech game. He's also playing 33 minutes per game over the last 8. The thing I think with Jamarius Burton, and I thought this in the Virginia Tech game, and I thought it in the Georgia Tech game. There were points in the second halves of those games where I thought, okay, this is where in January, in December, in early February, this is where Jamarius Burton took over. This is where he would take over a game and just will the team to victory, will the team to score more, will the team to baskets. And he just wasn't able to do it. Or he just didn't do it. However you want to look at it, it wasn't happening from Burton in the Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech games. And that, I think, is probably what has stood out the most to me, or maybe the most concerned. And maybe it's the way he's getting defended. Maybe he's finding better options out there. But it just seems like there were situations where Burton would have, I say tried, but successfully tried to take over the game. And it didn't happen. And I don't know if he could have won the Virginia Tech game on his own. Obviously they got big plays from other guys to win the Georgia Tech game. But I don't know. It seemed like there was a big moment there for Burton, and he didn't necessarily go after it for whatever reason. And there are probably more reasons than just, well, he seems to be in a slump. It's hard to argue with his scoring. I mean, he's, last 8 games, he's averaging 14 points per game, 13.5 points per game. So he's still producing. It's not like he's not scoring. And he did make big plays for Pitt on Tuesday night. He drained the final 2 free throws to seal the game, secure the win. But he hasn't quite been the same Jamarius Burton in these last few games that we've come to see and know and expect in the games previous. So we'll see how Burton's able to finish the season. I think the Syracuse 2-3 zone, I think, can be good for a guy like Burton who has the pull-up jumper that he's got. What do you have? He was 3 of 8 against Syracuse in the first game, 2 of 2 from the free throw line, scored 9 points, grabbed 5 rebounds, had 7 assists. So he was also really good at getting into the zone, I think, and then dishing or passing to the free throw line for baskets. Pitt overall, I think it has good personnel to attack the 2-3 zone in this game. And we'll talk about that a lot more on tomorrow's Morning Pitt. But it should be a good opportunity for Burton to make some plays, either with scoring or with the assists, which he has been doing over these last 8 games. Again, 13.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. So that's just some general thoughts, some stock up, stock down. I don't know if anybody's really stocked down at this point. Elliott needs to shoot more. Burton needs to kind of be Burton again. And that's about as close to a stock down as I'm going to get. Nike Sabandi's scoring has kind of fallen off, but after his defensive performance against Georgia Tech, I'm not gonna linger on that too long, because he earned that win as much as anybody with the way he played defense. Nelly Cummings and Federico, they're playing at a pretty good level right now. All right, tomorrow we'll get you all set for Pitt Syracuse. We'll talk about the net rankings and different things like that. We'll kind of wrap up everything from the week on the Morning Pitt, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com. That's the website. That's the mothership, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's got the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting, all at Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So go check that out. And but before you do, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I hope you've had a great week so far. We're into the home stretch of the week, heading toward Pitt's regular season home finale on Saturday. So have a great Thursday, and we will talk to you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.